the Good Shepherd Auditorium in Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where I meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we welcome playwright Jason Huza. A Montreal native, Jason and his wife Denise moved to the city simply to live amidst the great theater. Shortly thereafter, he tried his hand at writing a play, then a musical, then they had twins, then they had one more. And several years of chaos later, he is the book writer and lyricist for the new musicals It Happened in Key West, which is set for a U.S. premiere in January 2024 at the Fulton Opera House, The Last Match, which is just off a series of sold-out events at White Eagle Hall, New Jersey, and The Crossing, which was most recently performed as a concert in partnership with the Princeton Battlefield Society. Also, Jason is working on a song cycle with composer John Allen Watts, a new musical with Jeremiah James and composer Suhin Kim Ramsey, and is co-authoring a biography with Steve Grillo of The Howard Stern Show. When he's not doing all that, Jason can be found in and around Inwood wrangling his boys, smooching his wife, and playing with his kitties, Fuzzy Jess Butterworth and Sir Tomcat Stoppard. We are going to talk to him about all his work and many more things here about Inwood and therefore, but we welcome you first, Jason, to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It is an honor. Thank you.
You bet. So, as legend has it, and for you to go on record for now and for all to say, didn't you decide to move to New York after seeing Tom Stoppard's The Coast of Utopia in its entirety?
As legend has it, that is absolutely true. My wife and I were living in Seattle at the time. She was a theater major and actually introduced me to Stoppard's work. And it was shortly after seeing The Real Thing and then reading almost everything he had written that we saw Coast of Utopia was coming to the Vivian Beaumont. We bought tickets, saw a trilogy of plays in one day, 9 hours of theater. You break for lunch, then you break for dinner, and we flew home, and Seattle was no longer home to us anymore. It had to be New York.
That's amazing. Well, and Inwood's been your home ever since, right?
Yeah, we did a small stint in Hell's Kitchen, and then I have a good friend, Josh Walden, who introduced us to the neighborhood and the fact that many of the apartments up here come with dining rooms. And, we'd been eating at our coffee table in Hell's Kitchen. We wanted to do family dinner, so you want a dining room, you come upstate.
Exactly. Well, we're glad to have you here and call you one of our own here. But getting trucked onto your life as a playwright, if you will, and having read and seen your work, would you agree that Oscar Wilde and Tom Stoppard have been a positive influence on developing your own intelligent, language-driven style of writing, as I like to refer to it?
Thank you. Oscar Wilde, I couldn't think of a closer. My last son's middle name is Wilde. I share a birthday with Oscar Wilde. I've always felt very in tune with just the way he sees the world, the way he just has fun with words, and just kind of the levity that he brings to his work. That's definitely a style of work I'm attracted to. And with Tom Stoppard, there's no way I think a life could be more altered by the impact of seeing theater than the way my wife and I were. We saw his play and decided we needed to be close to that quality of theater. Not even to participate in theater or try to be a writer by any means, just to be here. Because there are moments in plays where you want to stand up and cheer mid-monologue, as that would kind of ruin decorum. But
did your wife do that?
She needs to. I don't know why she hasn't yet in one of my shows. I should expect it by now.
Audience plant, perhaps.
Yeah. But no, absolutely true. Those two have been the biggest influences on my style.
Gotcha. And haven't you met Tom Stoppard?
I did get to meet Tom Stoppard this summer. We had just seen Leopoldstadt, and he was there on the sidewalk, still smoking cigarettes, which, normally, is you see that and you're always like, oh wow, people still smoke cigarettes, weird. But you see him and he's still, the 1950s, cool guy with a cigarette. That image is still with him, and he was very gracious, and we got a chance to speak about a great many topics in a very short amount of time. So it was very much like one of his plays.
Well, yes. I think That's pretty awesome. So they say never met your heroes, but you met one of yours, son. So that's
I
pretty
did,
great.
and that's the only one.
Yeah.
That's there's no one else.
Well, let's take our listeners, given that and your appreciation for style, and I think it's kind of amazing that the works we're talking about in your bio, there's such a great diversity, and they're musicals too for the most part, which is also very difficult to write. So let's dig in and take our listeners on a tour of the current oeuvre of the Huza offerings here. So I mentioned earlier, and congrats on your musical happening in January. It happened in Key West, which you did the book and additional lyrics. And it's making stateside premiere. I did the West End thing already. So could you share with our listeners, the story which prompted the musical, which I think is almost stranger than fiction. Life is stranger than fiction. It's a real amazing true story. And then perhaps a bit about the journey of getting the show to finally being done here.
Sure. The story itself is a true story. It's based off a true story. There was a scientist named Carl von Kassel from Germany who, in the 1920s, felt driven to leave his homeland in search of what had appeared to him as the perfect woman for him out there, his dream woman, his soulmate, however you want to look at it, that she was out there in the world and that he was called upon to find her. So he did. He visited all around the world, South Pacific, Australia, landed in Cuba, made his way to Key West, and in Key West, as a 50-some-year-old X-ray technician at the Naval Hospital down there, he met Elena Hoyos. For him, it was love at first sight. Unfortunately, he met her at the doctor's office where she was getting X-rays, and it turned out that she had tuberculosis. So their time together was short-lived. He did try his best using his own methodologies to save her. He was unsuccessful, unfortunately. And after she passed, he built for her a lovely mausoleum in the graveyard down in Key West, and sat next to her for the next 2 years and read her stories and listened to music and really just spent time with the woman of his dreams. What happened next is open to conjecture. Some say that it might have been formaldehyde poisoning, something in the environment, or just wishful thinking or desperation. However you want to look at how people process loss and grievances. But he felt like she came to him and said, "Take me out of here and bring me home." So he rescued her from the mausoleum and brought her to his home where they lived for 7 years. And he would go out on picnics, and they lived very happily. What he says was the seven most happy years of his life, until he was, of course, discovered. It became national news because World War II had just broken out, and the world, or at least America, really looked at this story as a modern, Prince Charming and Sleeping Beauty type romance. He had a lot of support. I think America was pining for love stories, and the outpouring was very much like Miracle at 34th Street. He had letters just coming in from all around the country, some with money to build some sort of containment system to keep her. And when it went to trial, he was exonerated, and I won't say vindicated, because they did rebury her body as is right. But and we treat it almost, we're billing it as, or we've billed it as a Rodgers and Hammerstein meets Weekend at Bernie's, which in a lot of ways is accurate. But going to kind of the making of the story, it is a look at love and how far will you go once death kind of is injected into that. So there are very serious and somber notes in it, but it is a comedy, and it is a lot of fun.
And what I think is, having seen this, and it's in a previous concert reading of it all, when your challenges, but I think you do really successful, given that premise, is to make the protagonist sympathetic. As you're saying, like, you have people behind them, but like the audience has to be behind him, and this, or else, because if they're not behind him, you can judge them, of course, but dramatically speaking, for like, he is your protagonist in this show, and so he's not an anti-hero, or is he? I think because it depends on how strongly you feel as an audience in 2023 looking at this from 100 years ago, right?
Sure.
But I think it was a great challenge you all met, and I think, again, making that into someone like that into a protagonist for a love story is quite an achievement.
Thank you. You know, the only source material we used, he does have a journal. He kept a journal throughout this entire process. So that was kind of our guiding star. This is his version of events. This is how he perceived,
Right.
You know, what happened. And that's, you know, we didn't want to take other people's accounts into consideration. This was his story. And he is a sympathetic character. And I think, you know, we all process loss differently. He processed it much differently. But I do think it came from a place of honesty.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who are looking forward to seeing this play out, they'll have a chance in January at the Fulton Opera House in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's
awesome.
A beautiful, beautiful location.
Very cool. Well, let's move on because we'll touch on The Crossing,
Yes.
which you also did the Book of Lyrics, which is pretty fresh for you, right? It just performed as a concert in partnership with the Princeton Battlefield Society in New Jersey. This is not your typical stage musical. I mean, it's a site-specific piece, correct?
It is site-specific. Yes. So this is... so what I like to say... So side note, when we did do It Happened in Key West on the West End, on opening night, or press night, I guess, I went outside, and my dad had texted me asking how it went. And I stepped outside to text him, and then, you know, there's people smoking. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to walk 20 feet this way, pull out my phone, and I'll just call him instead of text him. I'm dialing, or I'm looking to call him on my phone, and a guy comes up and asks if I have a lighter. I say, I don't have a lighter. And then he pulls out a knife and robs me. On press night, 20 feet from the marquee for It Happened in Key West, right by Trafalgar Square in London. And I couldn't believe it. And the worst part was, well, many worse parts, but I had a pocket full of per diem that I had been given that day. So it was in one envelope. There was no finagling, no being sneaky about it. So he got me. So that was my experience with that. So when a composer reached out, and one of the producers for Key West put us together, and he had an interest in writing a show on Washington's crossing the Delaware, I really had a chip on my shoulder and really wanted to stick it to the British. So that was no, I'm joking.
It's okay. For those of you who know, we're recording this just after Independence Day, and we're within our rights to stick it to the British. Okay.
No, this was something that we had just settled on doing right before we went to London. But no, especially as a non-American, right? We came here from Montreal when I was 11, and I call it. What's the word?
You tell me, buddy. It's your story.
Wow. Yeah, sorry.
It's only a podcast. All the dead space everyone just turned off their podcast.
I know.
Thanks a lot,
sorry.
Jason.
History envy. I call it history envy, right?
Okay.
You learn Canadian history as a kid, and you're falling asleep, right? Then you
Right.
come to America and start learning America's history, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, right? This is riveting. And then you see the famous painting, Washington.
Charles Bronson could star as George Washington.
That's right.
I mean, that's exactly.
That'd be a good casting.
There's enough violence in this country to fill a book of it's just one long action movie, man.
It is. But this one, there's just something about that painting and something about that time period where the sacrifice involved and the elements that these people endured, and the lack of food, and they had the world's largest army breathing down your necks, and just what it took to, I guess, push forward. But then again, we also have. I mean, there's a shortage of shows out there that celebrate some of the notable figures from back then. So I guess our premise was, well, who are the other people in the boat, right? And the boat's filled with, famously 13 people to represent the 13 colonies. And we know Washington and Monroe's in there, and probably Billy Lee, George Washington's slave. But, what is his story, right? What is the other person of color that's in the boat's story? What is the androgynous person who probably could be a woman? What's her story? And then we live that history right here in Inwood, right? We have Inwood Farm that has the Hessian, the farmhouse that has the Hessian barracks right behind it. You have Margaret Corbin Road, just up at Fort Tryon. There's a composite of her in the show where she famously picked up the cannon after her husband fell in battle. Picked up the cannon just just a couple hundred yards from where we're sitting right now, and drew the first pension, the U.S. Army pension for a woman, came from Margaret Corbin. So we have her in there, and these are just some of the stories that we've uncovered through the research process with this show. And it's I don't know. It's been very gratifying working on this show as a fan of history and a fan of local history. It's all around us. So
very cool, very cool. We're looking forward to seeing how that develops. And you're gonna have to go out to Princeton Battlefield to see it. That's the thing, because it's very much about that world. So to touch on the third current work of yours, to say that your trifecta, if you will, and they all can be more different. Like I said, I want to bring up the last match. So my wife and I caught one of the performances at White Eagle Hall. It was almost as long as the Coast Utopia in 3 parts, and I mean this in a good way. You're never going to hear this otherwise, because everyone was cheering and booing the villain and hissing the other foil, and as you would at a WWF, as I say back in the day, big time wrestling, if you will. But it's what I would call a musical rock and wrestling experience. That's how I define it, and it was a blast. And and big time wrestling was always theatrical, but it takes it to a different level. So can you tell our listeners about it and how this experience came to be and where it's at now?
Sure. So this is this is another one. So this was the original concept was from Jeremiah James. He's he's one of the book writers on Happening Key West, and the producer, and then the lead producer on Last Match, and we've just become friends over the years. We have multiple projects, but then also just genuine friends through this process. And he, at the opening of It Happened in Key West, he was wearing an Ultimate Warrior shirt under his blazer, on to take questions that day. So
as one does.
As one does. So he's always been dedicated.
Did he have tassels on his biceps too, by any chance? No, I'm just kidding.
He needs them. I think we all need them. So this was his idea, and it was kind of like, how do you piece together a show formed around wrestling that's still a narrative, but then also incorporates real wrestling and has a wrestling ring, but then also because this isn't a wrestling match, and it's also not just a piece of theater. It's also not a musical. It's not just a rock show. It's a sporting event. It's become something that is really special to us, and I think something that the audience is really grabbed onto. But I'll tell you, from the beginning, this was something that was written in the depths of COVID. This was at the most dire time when things were really dark, and it was really, but we had people leaving the neighborhood. I had been laid off. The kids were, doing school by Zoom, and it
was an awful time.
It was an awful time for everybody, right? And this was one of those projects that really, we said there's a light at the end of this tunnel, and when we reach that moment, we just want to get together and have fun, right? Let's celebrate all things human, all things joyous, and just be in a room where we can, almost like in a sporting event, right? Like I was at the Yankee game last week, and when your team scores, the guy next to you might pat you on the shoulder. You grab the person in front of you, and you're cheering together, and you're doing the wave together, and there's a very communal experience to sporting events that aren't necessarily in musical theater. And then so it's kind of long-winded here, but this entire show was just, when we get out of COVID, let's go have the time of our lives. So the whole intent was to make the most fun show that we could. And
you did, and I was saying it was a blast, like I said, and you pretty much had the whole cast of Hello Dolly, Sans, Leah Michelle, but I don't know, maybe she was one of the Mexican wrestlers in a mask, for all I know, you never know, on their day off, body slamming and suplexing each other through song, and that itself was worth the price of admission. Yet there's still a great, joyous rock score, I think it's okay. I'm not that you need my permission, anybody in the world listening to this, but I think we do need to have more musicals and more plays that are joyous and are not, this is how I want you to think. This is how it should be. Everything is heavy. Boy, life is hard. Well, yeah, we all know everything is heavy. It can be at times. We know life is and can be hard. But, life can also be very joyous, and we can have some fun. And I couldn't say it any better. After the past 2 or 3 years of of exile into our own domiciles, we need to get out and celebrate being together as a community. And I think, just as a theater producer and as one in Inwood Artworks pushing things forward with our events, I mean, audiences still are not 100% back. I said they're 70% back, I would think. And I think more shows like yours will help make that happen. And so where is it at now with the last match?
So we did the four performances. Like you said, we had some fantastic actors involved, top to bottom. We had Ramin Karimloo from Funny Girl, Liz McCartney from Funny Girl, Amber Ardolino, who's now in.
Let me actually phrase it. What did you learn from that experience? Like moving the show forward, like in the writing of it and then putting it together. Like, what do you learn from those tryouts, if you will, in White Eagle
Well, the
Hall?
biggest one was in rehearsal. The show runs 2 hours.
Right.
In practicality, it ran just under 3. So that is something that we're going to have to account for, because there was such crowd interaction. And this was at White Eagle Hall. This was a concert venue. There were some seats, but it was mostly standing up, or it was a mix of the two. It was probably half the people were sitting, half were standing. So, to be asked to stand for 3 hours, it's a lot. But the audience was with us the entire time. Totally. They were cheering the whole time. We probably could have let it go for another hour, and I think people would have been into it. We had WWE stars. Matt Cardona had been in the WWE for 15 years. He's there wrestling Ramin. And then we have people from all walks of life, and it really had this musical theater / wrestling world. It was about 60-40 audience-wise. Yeah. So we're really leaning into that. We know that wrestling fans, really responded to it. Musical theater fans really responded to it. So the next steps, they are up in the air. There's some surprises we're not yet to reveal. Thunder Rosa, the women's AEW champ out of Mexico City, she recorded one of her songs in Spanish, so that is coming out later this month on her birthday. Very cool. July 22nd. And you can hear it on Spotify, right? Yep. The concept album's out on Spotify. You can hear what we have up there, and then
is that lastmatch.com as well, or something like that?
Lastmatchmusical.com. Yep, and you'll see all the next steps aren't announced, right? But they're coming.
But I'm just saying,
they're very soon.
Get people. We don't want to spoil anything coming up, but saying send people there so they can keep on the tabs of what's happening. This because there will be announcements coming up soon.
Very soon. There
you go.
That's the best way to stay in touch. But
right, good. We just want to make sure we get people, lead the carrot there. Come see more Last Match.
Yes.
But come see more joyous musicals.
You will be able to see it.
Another Huza experience, if you will.
Very exciting.
Which leads me to ask, what do you have in the creative pipeline now that you got these 3 things kind of like they're out in the world and they're moving forward now? So you have time to focus on other places other than your family, of course. So curious what's simmering now with you.
What's going on now? Well, that's always been the thing, right? Like I like staying busy.
And you're a multitasker too.
I have 2 other musicals that I'm working on right now. One of them, the first draft is done, and almost all the songs are done. With Sujin Kim, she just MD'd for K-pop on Broadway, and then with Jeremiah and I are working on that one again. Then I have a series of songs. I'm doing a song cycle with John Allen Watts, the composer who I worked with on The Crossing. This is much more a Cole Porter type affair, very lyric-driven, very... how much fun can you have counting syllables and making unorthodox pairings? That's what I think about. When I'm on the subway, if people have ever seen me, I'm sitting there just you might see my fingers just tapping one. All I'm doing is counting syllables in my head because it's just, and then stressing the sounds up and down. That's where I find my joy. So if you see Jason on the subway, he's not talking to himself like a crazy person. He's writing a musical. Yes, I am writing a musical, and half of Key, there's whole chunks of Key West where the first draft of the version, obviously, Jill Santiarello did Tale of Two Cities did book music and lyrics for Key West, took some of these songs and made them professional, as this was my first attempt at a musical. It's just, there's so much fun in finding perfect rhymes. It's so gratifying, and that's frankly what I'm doing with half my time.
The fact that you have fun doing it comes through in your work. I think it does. And
Thank you.
And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll get a production up here in Inwood one of these days. Should we ever get a theater up here? We're here at Good Shepherd Auditorium, which is awesome. And so we have good partnerships, but obviously we need to run things a little longer than a weekend here. So we'd like to have hopefully Inwood Artworks, if we can still stick around and keep doing the work that we're doing, maybe we'll get one of these days.
Yeah, well, there's not a better place. I mean, Inwood is fantastic, and there's been so many talented people. I mean, it's shocking just walking the sidewalk right next to you, just in Inwood. Just we even when we moved into our building on Cooper Street. I mean, one of the first couples we met, she was in Chicago at the time, and her husband was a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley, I believe. But we had seen him in Spamalot in Seattle in 2006, and and then now you're neighbors. So it's just it's such a cool neighborhood, and everything you and everything Ken do and your entire team with Inwood Artworks is so inspiring. So,
thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. And well, as a longtime resident, I mean, has the neighborhood inspired and found its way into your work? Mm-hmm. It'd be kind of fun to share with the community.
Absolutely, it has. So when we first had the twins, because obviously making theater is such a collaborative effort, and it takes, 30, 40, 50 people to get a show made, minimum, right? So when I had twins, there was just no time for rehearsals or for anything like that. So I was like, what kind of writing could I do that doesn't require 50 people to do something with it? So I turned my attention to novel writing. And, it was a good change of pace. It is something you can do. You're not limited to the constraints of what is possible on stage. It's just a different medium and gratifying in its own way. But the last book that I did, and it was published just 2018, give or take, almost the entire book takes place in Inwood. And that's just, that was just me, going on walks with my kids and just seeing the neighborhood and getting to know people in the neighborhood and the boys' teachers and, the parents at the playground. I mean, there's just something special about Inwood, I find. And, I used to tell people I lived up here all the time, and then I stopped cold turkey. And I was like, you know what? Now I feel like we need to protect this neighborhood. This is unique. So I just kept my mouth shut. Now I tell people it's terrible up here. I'm like, oh, don't come up here. This is
there's like artists you don't want. They're dangerous people.
Shooing people away. But so that whole book, the entire book, takes place in Inwood. So. Yeah.
What's it called?
Oh, yeah.
Where can I get it if it's around?
It's called Emma and Adam. Side note, it was my literary agent. She kept pushing me to write something a little bit more commercial, I suppose. And this might be too long-winded a story, but I was like, okay, I don't know what translates as commercial. It's kind of why the musicals are all different. Like all my books are very different. This was one of the things that she had a principal problem, right? Like my first, I wrote a Western, and I wrote a sci-fi book, and then I wrote another sci-fi book, and then I wrote a medieval one, right? Then I wrote a pseudo memoir on growing up in the '90s and sneaking off to go see DJs up in DC and Philly, right? And every time I send her in a new book, she'd be like, "Why can't you just stay on topic, right? Like, write a."
You're not Danielle Steele,
right? Yeah. Why can't you be more like Danielle Steele? That's like a constant thing. And I'm like, well, no, I can't do the same thing twice. I don't even think I could write if I had to do the same thing twice. So she was like, "Make me something commercial." I'm like, "All right, you want something commercial? Here." And I was like, "I'm going to write the anti-commercial book." So it is actually a very sad book. It's the saddest book I've written. I was like, I'm just going to make people miserable because you're making me miserable. And I actually do love the book.
You agents out there, take note.
I know. I love the book, but it is. I was like, I'm just going to go for it. This is a anti-romance story. It's going to be the saddest romance story you've ever read. And it was the first one of my books that got published. So go figure. Maybe she was onto something. Maybe I ought to stop butting heads. But so yeah, but that one takes place. You'll see every nook and cranny of this neighborhood represented in that book. So
awesome.
And I do love it.
Well, Jason, you have an incredible diaspora of work, like I said, and we haven't even touched on the plays, which I think is probably a whole separate podcast. We'll do part 2 on the plays you have rolling. But it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And before we say goodbye, where can we send people to find out more about your work and what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, probably the easiest would be just jasonhuza.com, just my name, JSONHUZA.com. All these shows obviously have their own website. I think Key West Musical, The Crossing Musical, LastMatchMusical.com. You can find out about those specifically. But on my website, you'll see links to the books, you'll see links to the plays, excerpts from plays, video from some of what we've done in the past. So there's a lot of stuff on there, where you can find about what's going on in Jason World.
All right. Go to Jason World. I'm pretty sure it'll be jasonworld.com by the time he's finished with it all. And he goes to take over the world. Pinky in the brain, right?
That's the plan.
Well, thanks again to Jason Huza for joining me on this Artist Spotlight episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where I meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment right now, please share this podcast and share some love by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcast. It really does help. Many thanks to Good Shepherd here for hosting us, and also to HideSites.com for Uptown promotional support. You can support On Air and all of our programming making a tax-free donation at inwoodartworks.nyc/donate or via Venmo at Inwood Artworks. Be sure to follow us on social media to keep up all that we do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmmakers Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. Inwood Artworks On Air is proud to be supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. And Inwood Artworks programming is made possible with the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Artworks On Air.